Are you happy for us? We're a little bit early, but I'd probably... 16:35? 15:35? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good late afternoon anyway. Very pleased to invite you to this session, which I'll introduce you to and then leave you in the capable hands of our debaters. Very impressed that you're still going strong at this time on a Saturday afternoon. So welcome to this debate, and the proposal here is that this House believes a consultant physio must be an expert practicing clinician, and that comes from the Consultant Network. Really delighted to introduce you to your three facilitators today. Chris Mercer from University Hospitals Sussex. We have Andrew McDonough from Northern Care Alliance Orthopaedic Service. We have Stephanie Mansell from the Royal Free Hospital. Saw a fabulous article on the TV about the Royal Free today with their operating theatres, which were... Oh, Chase Farm, yes. And then finally we have Anju Jaggi from the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, who is on remote, not in the room. I will now hand you over. Enjoy the debate, and I hope you had a great conference. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, and nice to see everyone. I'm going to do a bit of a plug for the CPPN. We're the CSP's newest professional network, and we're really pleased because it's taken a really bloody long time to get there. So we're really pleased to be there. So this is kind of on behalf of us. We're going to talk a little bit about the consultant role this afternoon, maybe say some things that we don't actually agree with. So we might say some things that might be a little bit controversial. So please don't go away thinking we're all idiots. You know, we are sometimes, but this is just to kind of generate some discussion and some debate. There are some topics that will come out from what we do today. So I'm going to talk a bit about what Andy would have said. So Andy and I have been emailing each other about 20 times this week trying to get Andy's presentation loaded up. So it's here on my phone, and I'm going to play you a bit. That's Andy. So it's just to prove that he actually did it, okay? Because I'm going to tell you what he would have said, all right? So we're going to talk about the different pillars and the different aspects of the consultant role. Andy's talking about the strategic and enabling leadership. So part of Andy's journey was as a Band 7. He was sitting down doing his IPR. His manager said, what you need to do is go away and do a strategic development course. You need to do some leadership training. And he was like, huh? I don't want to do that. I want to develop him to my AP role. They said, no, go and do this. This will be helpful. So off he toddled, started his courses. And the courses were talking about strategic leadership. Didn't really mean much to Andy at that stage. Talking about motivation, how to motivate teams, how to develop teams, how to build a team, how to sustain a team, and how to keep that going, how to build a vision. But also the courses talked about behaviour change, how to engage people in behaviour change. Was that really his role as a Band 7? Maybe, maybe not. But what did he take from that? Well, he came away from it thinking, actually, there are some tools here that I can use, there's some tools here that I can develop, there's some tools here that can take me to the next stage. And when he moved into his consultant role, these are the most valuable tools he took with him. So if Andy was standing here, he'd tell you strategy and enabling leadership is the most important aspect of the consultant role. It's not about clinical practice. It's not about PhDs, Steph, I'll have you know. It's not about education. It's about building a team. It's about leadership. It's about strategic enablement. So this was the greatest influence on Andy's physio career, had the greatest impact on him, but not only that, in his consultant role, this has been the most important part of his consultant role, because it's enabled impact across system, across national and international frameworks. So he's built, and the strategic and enabling leadership has enabled system-wide transformation. That's what the consultant role is really about, is around system transformation. It's not about being a clinical expert. It's not about being a clever academic. It's about making change. It's about system change. So that training course, or those 2 training courses that he did as a Band 7, they've become the delivery vehicle for the other pillars of consultant practice. So if we think about the 4 pillars, which we'll talk about a bit later, if we think about the different pillars of practice, if we want to focus on one, the most important to focus on is strategic and enabling leadership. That's where the change happens. Thank you, Andy. I'm going to hand over to other Andy.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for sticking with us very late on a Saturday. I'm going to come at this from the expert clinician side, but a little bit differently, a slightly different viewpoint on it. First of all, there are 4 pillars. There's debates about 4, 5 in consultant practice. Well, the expert clinician bit is the first one. It comes first because it's the most important. If you want to know what's important in consultant practice, want to know what's important in anything, generally speaking, follow the money. Okay, money tends to talk, doesn't it? These are the multi-professional roles of clinical practitioner and consultant. And if you follow them, the single biggest jump in point scoring that will get you a pay rise and a banding lift is for clinical practice and knowledge. There is not a particularly big jump for research. There is not a particularly big jump for leadership. If you read leadership stuff and the multi-professional framework for the consultant practice, I think it says system-wide about 74 times, something like that. If Andy was here, I would have had that tallied up and caught a little bit more. The side I'm coming at from, and can't get anywhere without social media, is what do people expect of us? And one of the big arguments against our types of roles, be that advanced practice, consultant practice, is responsibility. And where does it stop? And it's not hard to see on here, is it? You know, what's the point? It's only, we're only there when something hits the fan. Everyone wants equity, apart from when it comes to getting sued, when it comes to going to coroner's court. And my view is if you're a consultant and you take complete clinical responsibility, not just for that caseload, but for the caseload of staff who work for you. So where I work, we're quite mature in our advanced practice journey, and we're becoming more mature in our consultant practice journey. We have advanced practitioner-led fracture clinics, and we have SOPs clearly writing out who can come to those, who are the under, and who's responsible for it. And fundamentally, if you come to one of the advanced practice-led fracture clinics or scaphoid clinics, it's my name on the top of the letterhead. Not a consultant surgeon. I don't work under anybody. If somebody makes a mistake in that clinic, if I make a mistake, it's on me. If an advanced practitioner working in that clinic for me makes a mistake, it is on me. And I think that's the key thing. And again, I think with banding, with money, comes risk, doesn't it? And comes governance, and we take on that extra risk. And that, for me, that is what justifies the fact that it's an 8B or upwards, as opposed to an 8A, who fundamentally works under the guise of someone else, whether that's RChem entrustment levels, working under the guise of a consultant, whether it's within clinic under a consultant surgeon. And finally, who should you always ask? You should always ask patients, shouldn't you? So I did a bit of a literature search before the presentation, and what patients want is an expert. They want a clinical expert, okay? What I couldn't find anywhere is they want professors and system-wide leaders. Thank you.
So hello Congress. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person. As you're listening to this, I'm actually going to be on the field shooting members of my upper limb team, thankfully on a paintballing day out. So Chris kindly asked me to put a few slides together and contribute to this debate as someone who's been in a role of a consultant physio and supposed to add my 2 pennies worth towards this topic of whether a consultant physio should be a clinical expert or not. So I thought it'd be good just to put things into context and really about how I got to my consultant role. My career has spanned 30 years and I became a consultant in 2013. And I have to say that most of my journey, of which 20 years was after I graduated, was very much developing as a clinical expert in musculoskeletal shoulder rehabilitation. Around this period, Agenda for Change came in and recognised the importance of clinical specialism and development of a career progression beyond the team leader, sort of non-clinical aspects of career progression. So that kind of was a great opportunity really to recognise that clinical expertise should be valued. But how the problem was that consultant roles were not really wholly defined. There were relatively few of these roles. So for many of us over a period of time, we've just simply sort of carved out these roles. And I was just incredibly fortunate that somewhere like the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital was open to developing this. So what effectively was on the job description? So the job description is going back now about 10 years, but essentially it was primarily and still is very much a clinical expert role to provide knowledge and skills in managing patients with musculoskeletal shoulder dysfunction. I had to be an expert with regards to triaging, clinical assessment, onward referral, making sure that I had the knowledge to advise on appropriate diagnostic tests and imaging. Within this, as an expert within the field, the trusts were very keen that we raised the academic profile, and so a big component of my role as a consultant was to provide national and international delivery of teaching on shoulder conditions, as well as leading and collaborating on programs of research. The day job was 40% clinical, so I had effectively kind of about 6 PAs, very much in the clinical role, and then some protected time to develop academic research, the education role, my own continual professional development, which also includes mandatory training, and then 30% was very much to provide professional leadership, service development, and to ensure quality of pathways within the therapies directorate. So supporting our director of therapies within that role too. Clinical expertise is developed obviously through mileage, reflective practice, evidence-based research, teaching, developing skills and knowledge in others, and very much leading on improvement and innovation, developing service pathways. So actually, when it comes down to it, it's not a one-dimensional role. The clinical expertise, I think, is simply a vehicle in which to develop other elements. In the last year and a half, I've now taken on a dual role of clinical director of therapies. This mirrors the roles of my medical consultant colleagues. This role was only actually open to consultant AHPs within our organisation, as it was recognised that having some clinical expertise was essential to the job. I still do 5 to 6 PAs of clinical work, providing the clinical expertise that I do to the shoulder service. My remit is very much to drive quality research and education across all of therapies now, and taking on more accountability, some of the sort of quality metrics that we get measured on. I think one of the important things when this role was created was really there to be that kind of clinical insight into strategic decisions. I think part of the reason why I was given the role was I'd already got quite an established respect of clinical colleagues within the department, but also across the organisation. And my role now is very much being that bridge between operational and executive leadership in the organisation to deliver the trust strategy. So I think in conclusion, whichever way you look at it, you're never just a clinical expert. You acquire multiple skills when you're managing patients and leading expertise within a department. Do you acquire these skills in other roles? Absolutely. But the dual role of clinical expert gives kudos and a different perspective on things compared to other senior roles in the organisation. So in my opinion, consultant roles are designed to be experts within their clinical field, but with experience come other attributes and skills, which can then open the doors to other roles such as clinical academia, leadership. I think these roles are really key to the future workforce, and hopefully more AHP consultant roles will develop into the future. Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the rest of Congress.
She's far too collaborative, isn't she? It's just, you know, that's not the point, Ange. Come on. So now I'm going to hand over to Steph to stir things up a bit.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Chris, and as others have said, thanks so much to all of you for being here so late in the graveyard shift. I would like to argue that consultant physiotherapists need to not just be expert clinicians, but also expert and active researchers. And in order to achieve being an expert and active researcher, consultant physios must have a doctoral level qualification. You've heard us all talking about the 4 pillars of practice. So those are clinical, research, education, and leadership. And in the consultant framework, we also have consultancy that runs across the 4 frameworks as well. I wanted to take a minute just to reflect upon the options that we've got for doctoral level training in the UK currently. So the first of those is a PhD. So I am in the 3rd year of my PhD currently at UCL. And a PhD is academic and research focused. It contributes new knowledge through research, data analysis, and theoretical evaluation. The alternative to a PhD is a professional doctorate. And rather than generating new knowledge, a professional doctorate is about taking existing knowledge and applying it to a specific and often complex problem within a specific field. So still both considered to be at the same level, but different ways of demonstrating that level of practice. Level 8 apprenticeships have been mooted, but to my knowledge, they haven't yet to come to fruition. So you'll all be familiar with the Level 6, Level 7 apprenticeships. Level 8 is that doctorate level qualification. There was discussion some time ago about clinical academic apprenticeships, but I think they've been put on hold for other priorities. So doctoral level training develops a really broad range of skills, and they support clinical consultant level practice across the 4 pillars. I don't know if anyone else in the room has tried to get doctoral level funding, but I can tell you it requires an awful lot of tenacity and determination just to even get the funding and to be allowed the time to do it. And I can tell you, having worked as a consultant for 7-8 years before I started my doctorate, that determination and tenacity is definitely something that's reflected as being required in the consultant role. It develops critical thinking and analytical skills that are applicable across the 4 pillars. So it really develops your critical thinking in ways strategic leadership training doesn't, and that your expert practice just won't allow you to develop that critical thinking in the same way. Many of you in the room might think that you're expert communicators, and physios are generally really good communicators. When you start a doctorate, you have to learn to communicate not only within your own team, but across teams, and more importantly, across organisational boundaries. So my PhD is running between the juggernauts of the Royal Free Hospital in UCL, and let me tell you, trying to get them to work collaboratively with me stuck in the middle is a real challenge. And if you think about consultants, that's also something that we have to do in terms of communication. That's one of the key things that makes us different, is that communication across organisational boundaries. And so a doctorate really helps you to develop and achieve those skills. Many physiotherapists might also think that they're already experts at time management, strategic thinking and prioritisation. And those of you that have completed or are partway through doctorates will know that really nothing else challenges you quite in the terms of prioritisation and time management. And that mirrors that's required in consultant practice as well. Lastly, that level of doctoral level really does provide really very rigorous training and research methodology. And without people with doctorates within the physio field, we're going to continue to rely on other people to generate that evidence base for us. So we must have more people with doctorates, because we've got to take ownership as the physiotherapy profession to generate the research and the knowledge in order for us to apply that to our patients. Doctoral holders are considered leaders in clinical and academic settings, and that enables them to drive innovation and set really high standards of practice. It really helps for others to recognise that level of achievement, so it really helps to increase our credibility amongst our patients, our peers, and other healthcare professionals. I've had several positions where, you're sitting in a room, everyone else has got a doctorate title, you're the only non-medic in the room, and just having that doctorate gives you so much more credibility. So you can have all the clinical experience and expertise under the sun, but without that doctorate, how much credibility amongst other healthcare professionals, especially our medical colleagues, are we really going to have? We know that people who are research active and hold doctorates improve patient outcomes through their ability to apply evidence-based practice. And at consultant level, that's not just the individual patient, but at a population health level as well. And that critical thinking and evidence-based practice also really helps us to influence healthcare policies and advocate for the physio profession at a much higher level. So I talked about credibility and recognition already, but a PhD also signifies excellence and dedication to the field. So walking into a room or standing on a platform with that doctorate title really just does give you more credibility, sadly. That's just the reality. And so if you're standing there as a consultant physio without a doctorate title, I just don't think you're going to have as much credibility. We need to really consider also what's happening on a global scale, okay? So in America, they're all coming out with physio degrees already as a doctorate. And many countries are requiring doctorate levels for advanced practice level. So if we stagnate and we're not even requiring that of our consultant levels, we're supposed to be the pinnacle of our professional careers, how do we make a stand globally and ensure that consistency across the world? And we must adopt standards to ensure harmonisation of the profession globally. Also, as I'm sure some of you will be aware, we need to consider how we distinguish ourselves between consultant and advanced practice. And a doctorate's the really obvious qualification that helps us to make that distinguishing factor. So a PhD involves really deep specialised research and new knowledge, and it's not the same as clinical expertise. So, Andy and Chris might argue that actually we don't need to have doctoral level qualifications because clinical expertise and clinical experience can just replicate and improve that. But it's not the same. It doesn't. Clinical practice is very much about the application of that evidence base rather than the generation of new knowledge. And if you don't have the doctorate, it doesn't open the doors to academia and research careers in the same way. I do have to make this acknowledgement, that requiring a doctorate level qualification does limit access to those consultant level jobs. It would be amiss of me not to acknowledge that. I do think there's ways we can mitigate that now, though, especially by recognising other international qualifications. There's also just increasingly hugely flexible ways of studying for a doctorate. So there's part-time study, there's online study. I talked about the apprenticeships at level 8, which at some point in the future will come on board. And so with all these flexible pathways, I'm just not sure there's an excuse anymore for not doing it. There's also just huge numbers of increasing funding opportunities. So I'm NIHR funded, but there's people that have done Wellcome Trusts, MRC, CSP, like just a huge number of options on funding opportunities, as well as now mentoring and coaching opportunities to not only support you to achieve that funding, but also complete it. So I just don't know what your excuse is anymore, people. I'd like to bring us back to the multi-professional consultant level practice capability and impact framework. Gosh, that really is such a mouthful. Could they not have come up with a more succinct title? And this is the research and innovation pillar. And if you read through these requirements, then I can't see how you can achieve them without having a doctorate. And the doctorate is really going to be the best way for us to be able to demonstrate that we can achieve these competencies. And so I make a call to action. For any consultants already in the room who don't have a doctorate, I really hope you're making some plans to rectify that. And if you're aspiring to be a consultant, then please do make some plans to also achieve your doctoral level study. Thank you very much.
Doctorate, schmoctorate. That's what I say. Bloody academics, they turn up. That's terrible, isn't it? Okay, so this is, let's get real. Okay, so this is what it's about. It's really about expert clinical practice. Okay, the consultant is the pinnacle. This is our, we're the best at this job. We're expert clinicians and we can lead. And we can lead, we can develop people from novice into expertise and be those true clinical leaders driving change. We can probably do a bit better than this. This is what the academics would do. They'd ask for a second opinion from someone else. They might send their patient off to do a bit of Dr. Google. But true expert clinicians, expert consultants will be able to manage this. We know there are 4 domains of practice. It's always got a big red circle around the expert practice. Every document I see has got a big red square around it, says expert practice, because that's the most important part. And this is what it looks like. All those other little things up the top, the kind of fancy stuff, the icing on the cake, the real foundations, the bedrock of consultant practice is expert clinical practice. It's been recognised as a clinical expert. It's been the go-to for the clinical decisions. It's been the go-to for all those really complex patients. It's about helping to change those pathways for patients through providing good evidence but expert clinical practice. These are the must-haves. You need to be a real clinical expert. You need to be able to demonstrate that both within and without your work situation. You need to have a national profile to sell that. We've got some consultants in the room with some real fantastic clinical experts in the room who've changed the lives of patients with cord requiner pathways and cards and things like that. Okay, that's what being a real consultant's about, because that's about changing people's lives through clinical practice. So some of these people have national and international profiles in terms of changing people's lives across the world. And you've got shop floor credibility. Steph can walk into the ward, but she can't actually treat a patient. She can talk, she can talk clever stuff. She can use some long words, but when it gets down to it, she's going to struggle. These are the nice to haves, aren't they, Lisa? PhDs and things like that. Having one of those, you can have one of those if you like, but it's a piece of paper. It doesn't actually help you treat the patient. You can slip into a director role if you want. That's okay if you feel like sitting on your backside most of the day and not actually getting your hands dirty with a patient. You can do some service leadership. That's okay too. You can do some research, because then you can tuck yourself away and bury yourself down a rabbit hole. Or you can do an academic role, because we know that those that can't teach. Okay. So, I'm going to argue that we keep it real, okay? So, do you know what that Chris Mercer said at the conference? I can't believe it. Yeah. This is about keeping it real, okay? This is about keeping it founded in clinical practice. So my case would be consultants need to be expert clinicians, and the rest can just fill in the blank. Thank you very much. So, we're going to hand it over to people in the room, really. So we'll start off just with a show of hands. Okay. So show of hands of who thinks clinical practice is the most important aspect of consultancy. Who thinks research is the most important? Come on. Who thinks the strategic aspect is most important? Education? Okay. Well, game over. Well done, Andy. Okay. So, we're going to bounce it out to you guys. Obviously, we're not entirely serious. We've covered some of the aspects of the consultant role. Just in terms of your thoughts, feedback, comments, really. So, any kind of initial comments from folk?
So thank you very much. I really enjoyed this session, and you both did very well defending your opinions and beliefs. But I think what was really interesting is how I'd start with the end questions, which is, if you think that clinical expertise is the most important, then the second question was if you think that research is the most important, as opposed to if you think PhD is the most important. So I think conflating research knowledge with necessarily holding a PhD degree, I think it's what makes it a bit more tricky, because we could have that research knowledge, which is key to clinical, because if we're talking about clinical practice other than evidence-based clinical practice, then probably the answer would be different. But if we think in evidence-based practice, then we would need it to be research-informed in a way, not necessarily a PhD, even though I think they complete each other, which I understand you both acknowledge. But thank you very much.
Steph, did you want to talk about that research stuff?
Yeah, so I think it's about demonstrating that you're practicing at level 8. So even if you don't have the doctorate or the PhD qualification, it's how do you demonstrate that you're still able to practice at a level 8 within your research practice. And that is different between level 7. So a level 7, it would tend to be master's sort of level. Those people would not be independent researchers. Level 8 is where you're starting to be independent, you're able to be the principal investigator, you're applying for national and multinational grants, you're mentoring and supporting other people to become active researchers. So there is quite a clear distinction, which is one of the good things about the research pillar is it's much easier to distinguish what's level 7 practice and what's level 8 practice in terms of the research pillar.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I'm aware colleagues will have questions too. But if you had a chance to answer another question, it would be just, sorry about that, it would be just to do with, because I'm a PhD student, I'm in my final year, and I kind of know that a PhD is great, but it is knowing too much about too little. So if I'm seeing patients with wide variety of ranges, I will end up needing to do then probably 10 to 20 PhDs to cover all of them. So I'm just thinking of the practicality in that sense, if you know what I mean. But I really appreciate your insights. They're great ones.
Yeah, so I think it's not about the clinical aspect of your PhD, right? It's the other skills, as I was talking about in my presentation. So it's the critical thinking, it's the communication, it's the networking. It's not that really niche, the second joint of the 5th little finger. I'm not MSK, I totally got that wrong. It's not that really, really sub-niche bit. It's the wider skills that the doctorate brings you.
I'd just come in on that, and I'm an entire 11 days into my professional doctorate, so I have to confess to that. But I've published 7 research papers. I'm lead author on 4. I'm a PI on studies. I don't have a PhD. And I think ultimately, all these things are wonderful, but unless you are practicing clinically, then you are an academic, then you are a manager. To be a consultant physio, you must practice clinically and do those things. Whereas them on their own is a different job to me.
I don't know if this, oh, it is going to work. It's a bit of a cube. Yeah, interesting perspectives. So for me, consultant level practice is level 8. So doctorate level 8 is not just academic for me. It's when I was listening to all of those presentations, so Andy Bennett talking about his influence on system, national level, level 8, research with a purpose for, you know, system, national level. So it's about the level of influence. So if I would hate to see that we mandated that all consultant level practices have to have a PhD, because I don't think that's the case. I think it depends on the role. What's the requirement of the role? If you're doing a PhD, you've also got to think about why would you fund such a high-level role to then take 2 days out of clinical practice for X number of years? Where's the value to that? Whereas a system-level leader who's making a pathway, or you know, doing something across the system, their research is about evaluation of that impact on that service, and you can see the value of putting the monies into that. So what I suppose my take-home should be that it should be flexible for whatever that role is designed to meet whatever need is required, but it shouldn't determine it has to be a PhD academic. It might well be system level leader. So I think it's whatever is needed. I would hate to see it so rigid that it left inflexibility for people within our physiotherapy profession, when I know that operational managers won't release people to do PhDs because they don't want to take them out of a clinical environment, pay somebody at 8B8C for 2 days a week for 5 years for not to be there. So I just think we need to keep that lens and make it accessible for the profession. Just my thoughts. But interesting perspectives, and I'm glad you delivered it with humour.
The caveat is, you know, we're all on the same page. So, you know, and I think your point about Andy's is well made. You know, Andy was national clinical director for MSK. You know, we've never had physios in those positions before. You know, and he got to be in that position through the consultant role, through the expert practice, and having that expert practice. And somebody who was still practicing in that role, you know, was massively valuable. I had a chat with Steve Tolan about 5 years ago. Steve Tolan from when he was at the CSP. He said to me, "What are you doing? You know, why aren't you sitting in national committees? You know, the consultants should be sitting in national committees and steering national policy. That's because you take that credibility from being a clinical expert to the table." He said, because the people sitting around the table at the moment haven't got a bloody clue about clinical practice, and why would they? You know, so you know, the job of the consultant physio in that strategic role is to inform that, but inform that at an expert level, and that's what Andy did brilliantly. Yeah, Andy took, you know, MSK services through COVID. You know, he brought all of those people together, all the kind of, you know, all the MSK organisations, rheumatology, orthopaedics, all of the kind of patient organisations, brought all of that together through COVID, delivering, you know, at speed, you know, valuable documents, valuable advice, and that was based on his expert clinical practice, but also based on his strategic and leadership skills. You know, so, but that was all evidence informed. So it kind of, you know, links it all together. But that's what it gives us the opportunity to do, I think. Jack.
Question for Steph. With regards to this, your seat at the table point about credibility with having a doctorate or PhD, and more especially amongst medics, does that come at a cost for credibility amongst the shop floor if you were to be influencing a team that feel that you've become clinically distant?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you know, we obviously chose some topics to ignite some debate and discussion. So, you know, although I said all of those things, I don't necessarily hang my coat entirely on them. So I think you can get a balance. It's about clinical academic, right? So I think you're right. If you've got people who become purely academic, then they may well lose some credibility on the shop floor. I think it's about balance across the 4 pillars, and that how that's split up will depend upon different job roles and what's required of that individual service. So although I've been studying my PhD for the last 2 and a bit years, I've still been clinical because it's been a clinical trial. So I haven't lost touch with the shop floor, but I appreciate that might not be the case for everybody. So I think it's probably quite individual.
And for fairness, so gents, if in a few years' time, despite your clinical expertise as it stands, you then do end up for whatever reason, be that temporarily or from then on to retirement, you then aren't clinical. I imagine you're giving over your consultant badge, are you?
Where you go, Andy?
We had this conversation last night, and Jack probably
You knew
still
this was
mentioned
coming.
It's a really good question. We talked about it last night, and it's that thing of, if you're a consultant medic and you stop practicing clinically, you're still on the consultant register. So it's a well-made point.
I think
I
that's
would.
really interesting,
I would.
isn't it? 'Cause
I would step away from that title. So I think, I think that, that's just my personal view on. It's not because I think, I think you need to have something in all of those 4 pillars. There's something around that. But for me, for my own personal credibility, if you like, for my own being in touch, I would want to stay in touch with that role. So if a maybe like Andrew's role, if that was a director role came up, a director or clinical director that wasn't clinical, that wouldn't suit me. So I would step away from that, and I wouldn't call myself a consultant physio, because it's just a job title, and that job title should have some clinic in it, or some clinical. But I think that would vary for people, and it might vary at different times. People will go into seconded roles and do clinical director roles that might have a degree of, just because of job pressures or whatever it is, for a while they might step away from clinical. I think if you step away from it for a year or 2, well, that's fine. But if you're stepping away from it completely, then I think there's a question to be had, I guess. But it depends what the ask is. And we don't have any hard and fast rules. And if we look at, we've got about 210 consultants in the network, or in the previous network. We're looking for more to actually join, because you have to actually join this network now. But there's around 210, and the variety in the job roles is absolutely massive. The percentage of clinical that people do, some people are not doing clinical, some people are doing lots, and they're at different grades. They're at 8A to 8D. So you pays your money, you takes your choice, really. They are very different, and I think that's okay. That's okay, because that's part of the beauty of it, because they're adapting to local circumstances. But I think that I would step away, would be the short answer.
It's not a protected title or an annotation through the HCPC, so and the Centre for Advancing Practice have obviously got their ACP frameworks and the advanced practice frameworks, and although we have the consultant one, it's not really been operationalised in the same manner. So there's still lots of work for us to do as a profession to make sure that people that are calling themselves consultants are actually practicing at that level, and that needs to happen across all of the sectors, not just within the NHS. It needs to happen across all sectors where we've got physiotherapists working, because we need to make sure that there's an equitability of care for the patients ultimately.
Hi, Lisa, clinical academic hand therapist based in London. Dr. Lisa for credibility. Or maybe I just sit in a darkened room and look at data, nobody knows. I think I'm standing because I wasn't sure whether I was going to stay, but I've clearly stayed to this session. It was really interesting. 2 questions, really. One is, there's a similar discussion going on around what is a clinical academic. So is that someone who is actively engaged in clinical practice as well as their research? And it's very much the same debate that you guys have had. But also, listening to some of your discussions, do we need to flip it on its head and describe what a consultant physiotherapist isn't, rather than what they are? Because there's this mixed pattern across the 4 pillars and the 4 roles, and different amounts of each. But what it is not is someone who doesn't do any clinical care, has no engagement in research, doesn't have any sort of leadership role within their team, and perhaps maybe it's easier to think about it backwards. Just interested in your thoughts.
Andy?
Yeah, good points. The clinical academic I can't comment on. What it isn't, I suppose, comes back to my point before, a consultant physio isn't a manager, isn't a professor. A consultant physio is a physio. And that title should always have your job title in it as well. It's a bit like the advanced practitioner thing. You're an advanced practitioner, you're still a physio, and I think that's really important.
I think it's especially important with the debates that have been happening around the physicians' associates and a lot of colleagues who've struggled in primary care around job titles and roles. So, yeah, I agree. You should always include that physiotherapist title in how you're describing yourself, even at consultant practice.
I would go with describing what it is rather than what it isn't. I think it's much more positive and productive and gives people a clear target of what they need to achieve rather than not. You know, so I think I wouldn't flip it on its head, but I think we need to do better at describing what it is. I think that would probably be the way I'd go.
2 points. The first one, I think I would certainly agree with describing what it is rather than what it isn't, because you can't write a job description on what it's not, and you can't measure the metrics against what it's not. So I would certainly agree with describing what it is. Secondly, I would say I am a clinical academic, I am a consultant, and I also have a PhD, so I will be hiding in a corner in the darkened room some point soon. I think that there's 4 pillars for a reason. I've been a consultant for a number of years now, PhD less time. And I think the 4 pillars are there for a very good reason and a very valid reason, and every single one has strengths and, you know, can sometimes present weaknesses for individuals. But from experience of my consultant role and my clinical academic role and my consultant role, I think the beauty of having the 4 pillars is the flexibility. And I think one of the key factors of any of those roles is that flexibility, because there's times when I don't have much time to do clinical practice because I'm that immersed with research, setting up studies, writing protocols, doing everything, ethics, all of that stuff that goes along with a clinical academic role, writing papers, etc. And you don't have the headspace, but you can just dip your toe in the water and maintain some of your clinical practice for a short period of time. It might be next that you just need the headspace, your ethics are in, you're waiting, you've got that waiting time, you're just waiting for that next step, in which case you can catch up with some clinical work. It's about being flexible, and I don't think, you know, sometimes you say it must be 50-50. We have, with my job plan, it is 50-50. But that could be over a year. That's not necessarily each week it's 50-50, and it's spreading it out, and it's about flexibility, being able to provide the education, support for others, bringing others on, building capability and capacity. All of those things is we need to be flexible with it and try not to pigeonhole it quite so strongly.
Absolutely agree, and that's the beauty of the job. That's what makes them brilliant jobs, you know. So,
Hi. Lorna Johnson. I have to out myself as
my first clinical educator ever. Respiratory, musculoskeletal.
My job was done. So
well,
I'm outing.
It does. It says a lot.
I'm outing myself as an academic, and I guess, and I do have a PhD, but I just wanted to. I think there's lots of good reasons to do a PhD, but my question is. And perhaps I'm going to make a point first of all. I don't think anybody should ever do a PhD because they believe they're going to get more respect or kudos from it. I think there's many reasons to do a PhD, but that probably isn't the reason to do it. And I wondered if there is any evidence that people have achieved greater respect from having a PhD as a physiotherapist amongst the medical fraternity. Is there evidence of that? That's my question.
I would suspect not.
I can't speak for the PhD, but I can certainly guarantee having a consultant title doesn't help with medics.
No, I think clinically, you're probably right, it doesn't give me increased credibility, but there's certainly more grant opportunities for me at postdoc than like so many things I wouldn't be eligible for that my medical colleagues would be. And so it does make a difference in terms of income generation and grant opportunities for those that are research active. So in some ways, yes.
Shall I go?
Please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sophie. I work with Angie, actually, so I just tweeted her or X'd her. My question is, as a Band 7, you're already working to that clinical expert level. You've seen a lot of people. We've been around. I'm doing the clinical academic career pathway as well. What kind of metrics would you encourage people to start collecting to get a particular role within quite a niche area? So working at Stanmore within rare bone disease, what kind of things do commissioners want to, and in your experience, has really held its own when it comes to that?
I think the current climate's really hard to climb up at the moment. Our trust, we can't increase headcount in HPs at all, and to increase banding's really hard. I think you've got to show value. Fundamentally at the moment, you've got to show how would that consultant post or advanced practitioner post in realistic terms nowadays, save money, or reduce bed days. They're the only two things that work. I have quite a large managerial role to my job, which I didn't mention. And they're the only things that have currency in meetings. So it's getting hold of people in the right area. Can they look at budgets? Is there an underspend or an overspend on locum registrars in a certain metabolic bone service, if you're interested in that? Are they spending tons of money somewhere that a consultant physio could do the role and would be a cheaper option? And that's you're in. But you've got to get access to budgets, you've got access to people who...
about the money.
Always about money at the moment,
Always.
unfortunately.
Follow the money. Yeah. I think if you're, from a band 7 level, if you're looking for things that are going to put yourself, if you're trying to position yourself for those next steps, then the things I would advise you to look out for. Yes, you need to look at the opportunities within the service, but then it's what's your added value? What's the added value of you? What's the system want? Maybe not so much about the money, but how can you make a patient pathway better? Because you could do that without money. How are you going to make that, and what impact will that have? So you could start to collect that sort of evidence if you're thinking about, well, I'm going to be looking for this next stage. Well, then you go for your interview and say, well, actually, when I was here, this is what I did. This is the pathway change we made. This was the impact without the money. So if you're thinking about gathering little case studies, if you like, into your portfolio.
And just to add to that, I would look at the data. So use some of the data from things like the model hospital, things like getting it right first time, so that you can work out, well, where is your service underperforming, or where could it be better? And how could you argue that consultant or ACP roles could help to make those service improvements? Because then that's also helping you to show cost effectiveness and cost efficiency.
I'm going to go back a few points, actually, sorry. It was just when there was a mention earlier about you have to be clear that you're a consultant physiotherapist. And there are areas where you will need to be clear that you're a consultant physiotherapist. But my role is in a neuro rehab unit, and the role was advertised as a nurse or AHP consultant. So I am a physio, and I'm very clear with my patients I'm a physio, but actually equally it could have been an OT, could have been a speech and language therapist, and there are those other professions and roles as well. So as long as we're clear about what our background is, then I think that's important. Interestingly, I did some research into interviewing different AHP consultants across the country. I spoke about this earlier today, and there was a huge variety in terms of the education levels and the different amount of time spent on pillars of practice for people, and each job is probably going to have to be individual as to what the service needs are.
Yeah, I think it changes over time as well, right? So what your job plan might look like 1 year might change 2 years down the line, and that's good that we've got that flexibility across the pillars to be able to meet the service needs.
Yeah, going back to the beginning of all this, what is a consultant physio? It's probably all these roles, isn't it? And they are individual. And going back to your point about your role and it was advertised for anybody, that's a good point. And I think what we need to be better at is applying for any role. I get a little bit angry when I see on social media that people kick off because our job's advertised for a consultant nurse only. Just apply. Stop moaning about it on Twitter and put your CV in. Ring up the recruiter, go and visit them. Don't ask for permission to be invited to these things. But then when you get it, then you are a consultant physio and you must tell people who you are. I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, agreed.
So we could so easily squabble forever on exactly what words mean, and I'd enjoy that. But I do think we risk playing with fire with the sort of cultural synonym that we use with doctorate and doctor between a medical grade clinician and any PhD across industries, including outside of healthcare. And are we not risking doing the same thing with consultants? So that combination then leaves us very vulnerable, especially in the climate with the PA and AA debate. And should we therefore have the sense to be proud of what we are, but also very clear of what we are in such a way as to protect ourselves from some of what is only going to be a growing drama?
I think it's a bit about level of practice, though, isn't it? We're talking about level 8 practice. It's about recognising that we are working at that level. So I think that's okay, Jack, as long as we're clear. So I think we're not trying to be doctors. We're not trying to muddy those waters. Most people aren't. Some people are, and that's not helpful. But I think I think from the framework, from the pathway to consultant. I think we need to do better at that, better articulate that. You know, for us, non-medics, that needs to be better articulated. You know, whether people with a PhD will call themselves doctor, I don't have a problem with that. That's fine, as long as it's clear to the patient that it's they're not medical doctors. So there's something around that communication.
Call me Dr. Stephanie. That's it. That's all the patients. Dr. Stephanie. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Steph. Yeah, exactly. Not yet. Not yet. Yeah.
I've quabbled with that because the title consultant matters, and I work in fracture clinics where it's primarily medics. So I'll be honest, I don't use the title at work. It's on my letterhead and things like that. But I introduce myself, hi, I'm Andy, I'm a physio, and this is my fracture clinic. That's kind of where I've got to, so the patient knows there's no one else coming, there's no one more qualified. But I don't use, the only time I use the term consultant is when I sign the consent form, because it has my job title on. And I'll be honest, if I'm lucky enough to finish my prof doc, I won't use the title doctor at work because it means something in my environment, and I would never want to be accused of trying to conflate it.
Yeah.
I would go with prof doc at the end of my letter and keep it at that.
No, make them all call you Dr. Andy.
Not at all. Absolutely not. Diane?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wonder if NHSE will do something like they've done for advanced practice. So for advanced practice, certainly for ESR, haven't they? They've retired the term advanced clinical practitioner, and they talk about, so everybody's job who is an advanced practitioner on sort of the ESR for national data is advanced practice physiotherapist, advanced practice OT, podiatrist. So it's the level of practice and it's your profession. I agree with you. I think it needs, you know, you can have level of practice, consultant level, but you need to have your profession. I think that's really important. And then if you've got your clinical area, you can have that as well. So, you know, it might be consultant physiotherapist in, so trauma and orthopedics. But I wonder if NHSE will follow that, because that's what they did when they've done it with advanced practice. So you would expect that might come for consultant level at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, we need to be proud that we're physiotherapists, because we are, and we're good at what we do. So.
Yeah, I generally struggle with the title.
But that's
Andy's
fine. That's all right.
But I think I've been a consultant 2 years now, and I do consult fundamentally. I think the big difference in my advanced practice job and this job is I'll do my fracture clinic while some of my colleagues from A&E run round and ask me to look at 4 x-rays, while taking a phone call about something else, while sending an so I'm consulting on other people's patients all the time. So that's kind of where eventually it sat with me, because that's my job. You could throw the argument that a band 7 does that in a physio department to 6s and 5s, to be fair, but it's at the level that you're consulting.
Yeah, it's level of practice, isn't it? Everybody consults, at all levels consult, or qualified, because we teach that on undergrad, don't we? But yeah, it's level of practice, isn't it? Doctorate, that level, but it's not, for me, it's not an academic role entirely, it's a system role. Does anyone else want this?
Got time for one more, probably.
Yeah, just the final, it's a short one, I promise.
Ready?
Here we go. So, just shortly, I wonder first, of course, I wish you the best with your PhD.
You could call me almost Dr. Steph.
Do you? No, I think my question is, do you think that, because of course medical doctors don't graduate as consultants, do you equally believe that medical consultants must have a PhD?
No, because the consultant medic is on the consultant register, the specialist register. So the problem we have as a profession is we have no postgraduate exams. We get these titles by either MSc or by hook or by crook or 10 years service. If you're a consultant doctor, you've passed your FR Chem, your fellowship of whatever specialty you're in. And the benefit of that is you know they're of a standard, so you meet somebody, and if they're post-exam, they're of a standard. The problem with our profession is there are good APs and bad APs. There are good consultant physios and bad consultant physios, because we don't have that. I wonder if that will come one day. And then maybe
I'm going to stop. I've got the 1 minute. I think it was a 1 minute thing, or it was something else. But yeah. So I just want to say thanks to Steph and Andy, Ange and Andy Bennett. Thanks to all of you for staying. Graveyard shift, but you've done amazing. So thank you very much. If you're a consultant, please come and join the CPPN. We're looking to kind of build as a strong professional network to take things forward. Other than that, thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention.
Safe journey home, everyone. We should get a photo, huh?
Well, hello everyone, and that brings the CSP Annual Conference 2024 to a close. What a fantastic few days throughout the Students' Conference on Thursday and then the main conference yesterday and today. I've had an absolutely wonderful time, and this job has always been a huge privilege for me, but never more so than meeting with members and over the last few days and just seeing the energy and the quality that exists within this profession. I've loved meeting so many of you and being able to spend some time talking to you, understand where you're seeing the profession and helping me and the CSP to make sure that we use our time, our resources and our energies in the right place. The presentations were absolutely fabulous, and as somebody who spent quite a deal of time in academia and research, seeing the quality of those presentations and the content of them was really heartwarming. But also just soaking up that warmth and that vibrant atmosphere that existed over the last few days. And I know that exists every day within this profession. And I wanted to thank you for that. And I hope that you feel the same. And I hope that you feel that it's been really valuable being part of it. Ordinarily, I would sign off now with a breezy see you next year, but this year is, I have something more to add, because not only will we be back next year, but it'll be the first step on a brand new 4-year-long journey around the UK. And I am very clear that the CSP is a UK-wide organisation serving members across all 4 countries, the Crown States and the Isle of Man. So the next year, we are going to see you again, but it will be in Wales and it'll be in Newport to be exact. In 2026, we will be in Scotland, and then we will go back to Northern Ireland and to the UK and to England. I've heard great things about last year's 4 conferences, but this is different. This is bringing the whole of PUK in all its glory, in all its size, in all its scale to the 4 countries. Everything you have seen and heard over the last 2 days will be matched and hopefully exceeded. And I am not going to be shy about saying it, that we really want the countries to almost compete with each other to have the very best conferences that we can have. These days that we get together and the amount of work that goes into these days justifies it being really the very best it could be. And I would love to see you all there, because whether it's in Wales or England or Scotland or Northern Ireland, this will be your conference for your profession. And so please make sure that you see it as such and join us for those conferences and get to know different local jurisdictions, what the pressures are in those countries, and meet colleagues there who will be really proud, really happy and really full of energy in welcoming you. So as I say, this is the first time we have ever done this, so I mean it more than ever when I say to you, see you next year in Wales. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your involvement.